Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Cast of Falcons by Philp Parotti, narrated by Barr. In the air, sometimes, a cast of falcons, stooping for prey. 1. Standing beside the rail of the HMT Tribune, Lieutenant Devlin Collins, Royal Flying Corps, RFC, glanced to starboard, where he saw the Royal Navy destroyer that had escorted them from Malta coming up on their beam. He wondered if the speeding Greyhound would eventually move ahead in order to lead them into Alexandria, which remained only a few miles distant over the horizon. All things considered, their transit had been an easy one. Normally, Dev had been told, the Mediterranean could kick up more of a bother during the winter months, but in Dev's limited experience, the opening winter days of 1916 had produced nothing but unruffled waters, even if the air had remained cooler than he had expected. Egypt, when he stopped to think about it, had been the last place on earth he had expected to wind up, and what it might bring struck him as wholly unknown. How, he could not stop from asking himself, had things come to such a pass? First, he supposed, there had been Derry, Londonderry, his birthplace in Northern Ireland. The Collinses, his grandfather had told him, had settled on land east of there in the 17th century as part of the Anglo-Irish ascendancy, and as far as Devlin knew, remained in comfortable possession of Oak Hill, the family estate, ever since. Sir Colm Collins, the hereditary baronet who happened to be his grandfather, continued to enjoy a good return from the land, property which, owing to the laws of primogeniture, would eventually devolve onto his Uncle Ryan. His other uncles, Connor and Sean, and his father, Doyle, would continue to seek their own ways in the world, something all three had done together in a shirt factory that had enjoyed steady profits through the 1890s, but entered a slow decline when foreign competition had started to develop around the turn of the century. There, at the age of 10, Devlin had been entered at Foyles College, an old and respected school which, after his year as a new boy, he had come to love, playing rugby, owing to his size, and occasionally keeping the wicket for his house on the cricket pitch. But in 1904, all of that changed, and changed abruptly. "What has been wonderful for three," his father said one evening at table, when Devlin happened to be home during an end-of-term break, "is now only adequate for two. So I've sold up to Connor and Sean. At the beginning of June, we will move to the United States, to a place named New Brunswick, New Jersey, southwest of the city of New York, where Liam Kelly and I have bought a motor business. We are going to sell Maxwells. They are made in Tarrytown, New York, and in Detroit, Michigan, and from all reports they will provide us an excellent opportunity and set us up in the same style that we've enjoyed here." The move had given Dev something of a shock. The surprise announcement, the rapid packing, the hurried leave-takings, the swift voyage across what should have been a placid Atlantic, but which turned out to be a storm-tossed saga of seasickness, and ending finally with a quiet passage beneath the Statue of Liberty. After processing through Ellis Island and spending 2 nights beneath the towering skyscrapers of New York, the family finally disembarked from the train in New Brunswick. There they found themselves warmly welcomed by the Kellys who had moved months before and made prior arrangements for receiving them. And then, to Devlin's additional surprise, he found himself fairly welcomed into the public schools he attended, replacing rugby with football and cricket with baseball, while adjusting to a wholly new style of teaching in classrooms which, to his additional shock, turned out to be co-educational, and none so demanding as the curriculum in which he'd been immersed at Foyles. Occasionally the friends he made commented on his accent, but considering the array of immigrants with whom he went to school, Irish, German, French, Italian, Polish, and even Russian, he was not singled out for his country of origin. He assimilated fairly swiftly to the atmosphere in which he found himself, excelled in both his studies and the sports to which he dedicated his time, and accommodated himself to his new surroundings with the ease that only the young can indulge. In keeping with his father and Mr. Kelly's business, Devlin learned to drive early, even before his 14th birthday, qualified for his license, and began spending his weekend and vacation time in his father's automotive garage. It was there that two former blacksmiths, Todd and Pringle, taught him everything they knew about engines, so that by the time he was ready for college, even his father considered him to be a skilled mechanic. As a result, when Devlin entered Rutgers in 1910, he opted for a course in mechanical engineering, continued to work for his father on weekends and during summer vacations when not otherwise engaged, and helped to support himself during his college tenure. It was not that he needed to. His father and Mr. Kelly's business had thrived almost from the moment that they'd established it. But whether it had developed from an ingrained sense of responsibility or his sudden immersion in a culture where hard work and manual labor were taken for granted, Devlin had developed early on a serious turn of mind. That mind continued to equip him with what he believed necessary if, like his father, he was to be expected to make his own way in the world. Socially, Devlin remained a fairly serious young man. Without ever indulging in what would have been considered walking out together in Derry, he escorted Colleen Kelly to the occasional New Brunswick tea dance, school events, promenades, and after his entrance into Rutgers, to college functions. Colleen, an intelligent, pretty redhead, followed her own course of studies at Barnard in New York City. Their relationship, based largely on their father's partnership, never passed beyond a comfortable friendship formed in their youth, and both seemed perfectly content that it should remain so. What might have been considered serious courting simply didn't occur to either of them, so committed were they to their individual pursuits. And then, on a summer afternoon in 1912, hearing a sudden sound overhead, Devlin looked up and spotted something that changed his life. Soaring like a bird, free on the air and directly over New Brunswick, Devlin saw his first airplane, what he believed to be a Wright Brothers Model B trainer, something he had only seen in one or two photographs that had appeared in the illustrated papers. The sight, when he first apprehended it, sent something like an electric shock down the back of his spine, and in the same instant he absolutely knew that he wanted to learn to fly, to pilot one of those machines which, he imagined, might take him anywhere he wished to go, with the freedom of an eagle. Without mentioning to his family what he was doing, Devlin made inquiries. He learned that the Wright brothers maintained an aviation school in Dayton, Ohio, something which he determined to be out of his reach for both expense and distance. However, he also learned that they were running a summer course in Mineola on Hempstead Plain on Long Island. So, equipped with monies accumulated through his work in his father's garage, and still without telling anyone in the family what he was doing, Dev enrolled, making weekend trips to Hempstead Plain by train. He camped out overnight on the grounds on Saturdays and Sundays, completed the ground school with stellar marks, and after 3 hours of dual-seat instruction, made his first solo flight at the age of 20 in August 1912, on a Wright Model B trainer of the type he had first seen in the air over New Brunswick. "I think you might be a bit of a natural," Tedford Scott, his instructor, told him after he'd seen him solo twice more. "But I want to warn you, Dev. Being a natural can kill you as sure as if you was an incompetent. Check your engine, check your rigging, and then, when you gets behind them controls, never ever let your concentration wander. These birds are dandy when they behave, but it don't take 'em 2 seconds to go wrong, and if you let your mind wander, 2 seconds is long enough for them to kill you. Mind what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir," Dev said. Across the remainder of that year, Devlin Collins accumulated more than 12 hours of flying time in his logbook, and then, in 1913, he accumulated 45 hours more, and even more hours following in 1914. Sometimes he flew planes at the Wright Flying School or rented a plane from the Long Island Flying Club. By this time, he'd acquainted his family with his aspirations regarding flight. While he'd given his mother a fright with the news, His father, always one to seize an opportunity, had been supportive and given him encouragement, suggesting that while no one knew anything about the so-called future of flight, it might lead to business ventures in the future that had been as unforeseen as what the automobile had originally provided. And finally, on a warm morning in early June, with both the Collins and the Kellys attending, Devlin walked across the stage at Rutgers, received his diploma, and graduated from his university as a fully qualified engineer. 2 days later, the families reassembled to watch Colleen receive her diploma at Barnard. To everyone's surprise, by means of connections she'd made through a classmate with whom she'd gone through her final 2 years, Colleen went almost immediately into a sub-editor's position with a respectable publishing house in Lower Manhattan. Dev, determined to consider his options before committing himself to a place, continued to work for his father and Mr. Kelly, spending 6 days a week in the garage and flying on Sundays. But that work only continued for 4 weeks, until his father sat him down one evening after supper, flashed him a smile, and said, "Your uncles wish to install an entirely new steam plant with which to run the factory. They'd like you to go to Derry, on salary, to oversee the installation. I doubt that the work will require more than 3 or 4 months to complete, and after your efforts at Rutgers and your work here, it might give you a vacation as a part of the bargain. Feel like visiting the family back in Ireland?" Faced with such an unexpected opportunity, Dev felt delighted to be able to go. Dev arrived in Derry during the 2nd week in July and went straight to work overseeing the new installations at the factory. In order to reacquaint himself with his uncles, his aunts, and his many cousins, he lived for the first month with his Uncle Connor, his second month with his Uncle Sean, and then moved to Oak Hill to live with his Uncle Ryan's family not long after the Germans invaded Belgium, launching the Great War. Almost immediately, his uncles bid for and received government contracts that called for the production of an array of uniform shirts. The work went ahead even more swiftly than originally planned, while Uncle Sean oversaw the factory's extension into an adjacent building so that production capacity could be increased. Dev designed and oversaw the power plant, while his uncles saw to the extension's layout and the hire of additional staff. On the streets, in the pubs, in the music halls and theaters, Dev detected what almost amounted to a euphoria about the war. Everything seemed to be festooned with the Union Jack or red, white, and blue bunting. Rallies and recruitment drives seemed to be going on daily, and there appeared to be a general feeling that the war would be quickly won and conclude within months, if not weeks. Marches and parades clogged one street or another at more than frequent intervals, and twice, after listening to recruiting sergeants deliver their spiels from elevated platforms and turning to walk away, sharp-eyed young women with looks of contempt on their faces had hurried up to him and deposited white feathers into the breast pocket of his jacket. America, as the newspapers were quick to point out, would not be entering the war, President Wilson committing the country to remain neutral. A part of Dev tended to treat the white feathers as amusing dispensations from ignorant girls who didn't know the first thing about him, where he came from, of what he was doing there. But after a few weeks of this sort of thing, Devlin Collins began to feel a rub which soon began to chafe, and then feel downright raw. As Paris was threatened and the BEF dispatched to hold the line on the Marne, Dev began to feel more than a little conflicted about the war. New Brunswick was his home. His family was there. He'd largely grown up there, gone to school there, and planned his life there. But from the start, the family had maintained dual citizenship, meaning that no matter how he looked at it, he remained in some part a subject of the crown. Dev couldn't deny that Derry, regardless of the distance that had for so long separated him from her, also remained his home, the place where he'd been born, the city in which he'd spent his tender years. Being back, almost accidentally at this particular moment, reminded him that he loved his first home as much as his second. And with that realization, he felt some kind of responsibility to defend her. Meanwhile, work at the factory went on without a break. Dev sometimes laboring as many as 14 hours on a Saturday, and even into Sundays as yet more government contracts accumulated. Uncle Connor landing a contract to expand production to manufacture webbing for such things as belts, knapsacks, duffel bags, and brailing loops for tents. Commensurate with the need for doing the job right and doing it safely, Dev rushed his own work as productively as he could, with the final result that the factory, now expanded into 3 buildings, had started working 3 shifts by the middle of November, Dev's uncles declaring themselves more than satisfied with what he'd accomplished and awarding him a generous bonus to underwrite their thanks. With the job concluded, Dev might have returned to New Jersey, but he didn't. Instead, sitting down before the writing table in the room at Oak Hill in which Uncle Ryan had installed him, he wrote a long letter to his parents and concluded by saying, "Being back in Ulster has reminded me that I'm as Irish as I am American, and that I have a responsibility to defend our United Kingdom. I think I can contribute. I intend to join up." And then he went to have a talk with his Uncle Ryan. By virtue of his position in society, having inherited the baronetcy from Sir Colm, Sir Ryan was particularly well connected and well placed to help Devlin when Dev finally approached him about entering the uniformed service of his country. In the beginning, feeling a responsibility to his brother and motivated by a genuine liking for Devlin, Sir Ryan tried to talk him out of making the commitment. "With your engineering expertise, Dev," Sir Ryan said, "I think you could be of more help to the cause by staying right here in Northern Ireland, or establishing yourself somewhere in the Midlands, where you could help us increase our production of war materials." "That, if I'm rejected, I will most certainly do," Dev said. "But if I don't attempt to join and offer to take the risk, I fear that I will never be able to stand straight again and face myself in the mirror when this thing ends." They talked on, the two of them, for more than an hour. But when Sir Ryan knew finally that Devlin remained firm in his intention, he acceded to his nephew's request for help, made the requisite telephone calls, and sent him to Victoria Barracks in Belfast for an interview with a major in the Royal Irish Rifles. Major Mumford, when Devlin met him, at first treated Devlin's request to become an officer candidate, what Mumford called a temporary gentleman, with skepticism. But after an hour's interview and in consideration of Devlin's background, education, and practical training, his view changed. "Normally," he told Devlin, "we draw our officers from Sandhurst, Woolwich, or an OTC connected with public schools like Eton, Harrow, or Rugby. However, at Aldershot, an experimental company has formed, a cadet training company, which the Army intends to expand into a battalion should more officers be needed later in the war. If you are agreeable, I think we might be able to fit you into it." Devlin declared that he was indeed agreeable, and during the week following Christmas 1914, he took ship, crossed the Irish Sea, and made his way to Aldershot. There he quickly passed his physical examination, held up his hand, swore his oath, and took the King's shilling as an officer cadet in the training company. To his surprise, he found himself included in a mix of recent public school graduates, bank clerks, former sergeants, and former warrant officers. All of them blended together for 3 months of square bashing, classroom instruction, and rigid military discipline. Devlin found the course in no way difficult and passed out near the top of his class with the King's commission as a second lieutenant. He returned to Victoria Barracks in Belfast just in time to be dispatched, again on an experimental basis, to see what a temporary gentleman could do, in a draft of replacements to fill officer gaps in his regiment that had resulted from the battle for Neuve-Chapelle, which had been fought in March. Based on his 3-month stint in the trenches, Devlin later found that he could not look back on them with pleasure. Aside from the drenching spring rains, the mud, and the rats, there had been the vermin, the smell, the noise, and what had sometimes seemed a never-ending stream of Bavarian bullets piercing the air immediately overhead. Then, finally, in the high heat of July, with nearly everyone soaked and bedeviled by their own sweat, his battalion had gone over the top in the Battle of Fromelles, his own platoon losing 3 dead and 7 wounded, including himself when a machine gun bullet shattered against a steel picket and threw a sliver into his thigh. The sliver had not been large, and in the field hospital to which he had limped, it had been quickly removed by a medical attendant who next poured in enough tincture of iodine to make him feel like his leg was on fire. Thereafter, bandaged but limping, he returned to his trench, resumed his duties, and 3 days later put himself forward when his battalion commander announced that the Royal Flying Corps had sent down a bulletin seeking recruits. "Sorry, old chap," said the lieutenant colonel, somewhat contemptuously, who had stopped at division headquarters to interview potential candidates for the RFC. "But we are not presently taking temporary gentlemen into the RFC." "Not even temporary gentlemen who are certified aviators with more than 80 flying hours in their logbooks?" Devlin asked, immediately producing his. "Ah," said the lieutenant colonel, pinching his lips even as his eyes narrowed. "A spot of difference there, if you see what I mean." "Quite," Dev agreed. 3 days later, still limping slightly, Devlin Collins boarded ship at Calais, disembarked at Dover, took the train to London, and enjoyed a week's convalescent leave before boarding yet another train, which put him down at Montrose, Scotland, where he went through preliminary flight school and passed out first in his class. 4 of the group of 20 with whom he had started the course failed to complete it, each of them killed in flying accidents before the course had half ended. At the time, Dev found the deaths distressing, but there were so many in the flying schools that he also knew he had to accept them as routine. From there, Devlin was dispatched to the Central Flying School at Upavon on the Salisbury Plain. There, graduating to more sophisticated planes and training, he not only learned to fly more demanding aircraft, but also had to master a variety of associated skills, including bomb dropping, photography, artillery observation, distance flying, formation flying, fighting practice, and finally, machine gunnery. The course on machine gunnery lasted a full week, in which the pilots sat on hard benches, memorized the parts of a Lewis gun, learned how to take them down and put them back together, how to load their ammunition canisters, and how to clear jams. Finally, months after he'd returned from France, Devlin received his passing out certificate, granting him permission to sew on his RFC wings. This time, 3 more of his classmates had died in training, one when the wings on his plane folded back in a dive, one who flew into a tree, and one when his engine quit on takeoff, and he made the unforgiving mistake of trying to turn back. Then, as fully prepared as the course could make him, Devlin once more prepared to return to France, where the Huns, as they were then known, seemed to be shooting Allied pilots from the sky as swiftly as the RFC could train them and send them into combat. What, Devlin had wondered at the time, would he be flying? A Sopwith? A Newport? A Vickers? His flying school marks attested to his high performance and his competence as a pilot, and in the meantime, he'd been promoted to lieutenant. Although he could not foresee developments, he fully expected to be assigned to fly a scout and looked forward to getting into the air with a frontline squadron. But his passing out interview did not turn out as expected. "France," said Major Horton, the balding, overweight assignments officer who interviewed Devlin, the man's eyes and lips screwing up with a smile as he said so. "Oh, I think not, Lieutenant. Dispatched 3 drafts of new pilots to France yesterday, don't you see? For the moment, France is full up, with pilots to spare, so you're not needed in France. So I'm sending you to where you are most needed indeed. You're going to Egypt, Lieutenant, to defend the Suez Canal. Vital, the canal, don't you see? Passage to India and all that. Absolutely vital, the canal. And just at the moment, the Boche are making a fuss about it. Trying to take it, if you see what I mean. You're needed there, and with your flying skills, I should imagine that they will make you a flight leader straight away." "But, sir," Devlin started to say. "No buts, Lieutenant," interrupted Major Horton, handing Devlin a manila envelope containing a train ticket to Southampton, a steamship ticket to Alexandria, and a set of orders. "New horizons await, so off you go, and let me wish you good hunting to speed you on your way." And so, 2 days later, Dev boarded HMT Tribune and steamed for Egypt. 2. Dev saw very little of Alexandria when the Tribune tied up alongside the quay and put over her brow. In the moment he stepped ashore, his duffel slung over his shoulder, he found himself met by Captain Trevor Rotham, a short, slightly built, impeccably dressed officer who might, in civilian life, have easily passed for a jockey, but for the ribbon of an MC that adorned his blouse. "Lieutenant Collins, are you?" Rotham said, as Dev put down his duffel and saluted. "Yes, sir," Dev said, standing to attention as Rotham returned his salute. "Rotham here," the man replied. "Commanding B Flight, 14 Squadron. Pick up that duffel and come with me." Devlin grabbed his duffel and hastened to catch up with Captain Rotham, who had turned and immediately started walking toward a Crossley tender at a rapid pace. "Toss your duffel in the back and get in," Rotham said, instantly hoisting himself into the driver's seat and starting the engine. Dev did as he was told, and as soon as he sat down, Rotham popped the clutch on the tender, bolted down the quay and onto the street, and sent what he called the jippos flying in all directions as they leaped out of his way. "Won't do to waste time," Rotham said as the tender accelerated. "There's a due-on in the desert, and we've been called for." The intensity with which Captain Rotham spoke signaled to Dev that things were going to develop much more rapidly than he'd ever imagined they could. Rotham seemed to be talking about action, something immediate, something demanding, and Dev hadn't been disembarked for as much as 5 minutes. "Now listen up," Rotham said, "because I'm going to give you the drill. Off to the eastern Sinai, Colonel Freiherr Kress von Kressenstein, the Bavarian artilleryman, is threatening a fuss with the probable expectation of seizing the canal. At the moment, he seems to be the principal advisor to the Turks, who will be doing most of the fighting. What that means for practical purposes is that he's commanding them, and he appears to be a man who knows his business. That's bound to be a big do when it unfolds, but it hasn't quite developed yet. And in the meantime, we've got trouble to the west, which is where, as you've probably noticed, we're heading." Where they were heading at that moment, more precisely, appeared to be straight toward 2 donkey carts, their white-robed Egyptian drivers screaming curses at the top of their lungs while beating their donkeys to move them out of the tender's way. With a deft touch on the wheel, while Dev thought his stomach might turn over, Rotham swept around them with mere inches to spare. "Our problem," Rotham continued, unmoved by the disaster he'd barely avoided, "are the Senussi. German and Turkish agents have gotten out into the desert west of here and agitated the Berber and Arab tribes. The Senussi are a religious sect, and with those buggers, the agitation seems to have taken hold, so much so that they have been raiding British outposts and killing British personnel. In December, a force of some 12 or 1,300 of them, armed with both machine guns and artillery, attacked our western frontier force near Wadi Shaifa and made a considerable disturbance. They were vigorously repulsed, of course, but in the wake of their attack, their forces swelled to possibly as many as 5,000 rifles. We've kept tabs on them from the air, and working in company with the WFF, we substantially reduced their numbers and given them one bloody nose after another. But right now, south of Alexandria, about 50 miles, they seem to have collected a concentration around Wadi Mogara. There's an oasis of sorts where water is plentiful." With a sudden leap, the Crossley bounced over a pothole, scattered a flock of chickens, and sent a herd of goats leaping for cover, the herder, screaming with fear, pressing himself against the wall to avoid being run down. "Yesterday," Rotham went on, "Yates, flying from El Hammam, which is about 20 miles distant and where we're headed, reconnoitered Megara, but apparently his plane broke up in the air on the way back. We found it last evening before sunset, and both Yates and his observer were dead. This time we're taking 2 planes out, you and I, with bombs instead of observers." Devlin Collins felt his stomach tighten. 15 minutes ashore and not yet outside of Alexandria, and Rotham was talking about a mission, a combat mission, as though it were some kind of a Sunday flight over the Hempstead Plain. "If I might ask, sir," Dev said carefully, "will we be flying Bristols, Newports, or Vickers?" Hunched behind the wheel, his small stature necessitating that he peer through it in order to drive, Rotham's jaw dropped slightly open. Then, much to Dev's surprise, he broke into such rollicking laughter that he nearly ran them into a ditch. "The lads, when you finally meet them, will be much amused, Mr. Collins. No, I'm afraid not. As far as I know, Bristols, Newports, and Vickers have never been seen on this front." Anything resembling a new scout or a new aircraft of any kind goes to the Western Front, which means that our masters, benighted though we believe them...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?